I think we might as well make a start. We've got a good little crowd here. It's about 7:10, and I'm sure Dean's got a lot to talk about tonight. I begin, if you can all take your seats, please, guys. Down the back there. Mr. Speaker. Were you a speaker, John? No, you weren't a speaker. Alex Andronopoulos was, correct? Λοιπόν, καθίστε. I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet, and I pay my respect to their elders, both past, present and emerging. First of all, if you read the newsletter about a week ago, you would have found out that unfortunately the lecture that Brasida was to deliver tonight has been postponed, and that is because his mother passed away just a few days ago, and we as the Greek community, and I'm sure all of you, pass on our condolences to Brasida for his loss. I'd also like to thank Denise Zapantis, who sponsored tonight's lecture, and I also, on behalf of the community, want to pay my respects and pass on my condolences to Denise, whose mum recently passed away. Συλληπιτήρια, Denise, and thank you very much for attending tonight's lecture. Nico Dalla, who's normally here and presents these things, is away. He's a busy boy. He was at a conference at Geelong on Monday and Tuesday. Yes, he was at a conference on Queen's birthday. Nick never sleeps, and now he's off to Sydney for some work, and he does apologise. And he does apologise to Costa Kalimniou for making a mistake, and that, yes, Costa, you have published 7 poetry collections, not 6. Apologies for that. Και να τα εκατοστήσεις σιγά σιγά too. Where are you? You'll get there pretty soon. Costa, πού είσαι? Εκεί κρύβεσαι, έτσι? And thanks very much, Costa, because on short notice you basically stepped up, and you will be delivering tonight's lecture, which is titled Great Ionia, the Chinese Connection. And according to the synopsis that you all have in front of you, it was the Chinese who gave the name Great Ionia to the Greek-speaking kingdom that was founded on the outskirts of the Chinese Empire in Hellenistic times. Now, what can we say about Dean or Costa Kalimniou? Well, he's a frequent visitor here and a frequent deliverer of our lectures, and we thank him very much for really contributing to making these lectures a success. He's been delivering lectures to us over the past 4 or 5 years, and I'm sure he will do that. He will continue to do so in the future. And you know you've really made it in life when you've actually you're on Wikipedia. Yes, Costa, you are on Wikipedia. So if anyone wants to find out more information about Costa Kalimniou, you can go to Wikipedia and find out all these secrets. So there you go. Very popular. If you're on Wikipedia, you've done very, very well. But as far as I'm concerned, what surprises me about Dean is his ability to multitask, something that us more mortal as males aren't very good at. But obviously Dean is not just a mere mortal male, and he's proven himself. Dean is a father, he's a husband, he's a lawyer, he's a son to Helen and Alexandra, and your mum normally is a great supporter, but for some reason she's not here. But from what I understand, Dean, she's looking after your children tonight, correct? She has she? I don't know about that. I know your mother very well. She'll never do that, my friend. Your father maybe, but not your mum, that's for sure. A poet, I said, a writer, a musician, a spokesperson for various groups, and maybe even a philosopher. But as far as I'm concerned, what's good about Dean, he's a hell of a nice guy. So without further ado, please welcome Dean Costa Kalimniou.
Την κοινήν ελληνικήν λαλιάν, ως μέσα στη Βακτριανή την πήγαμε, ως τους Ινδούς, Καβάφη wrote. The common Greek tongue, we took it into Bactria, we took it to the Indians. Well, tonight we're going to find out that the Greek people did not just reach India in ancient or Hellenistic times, but they went a bit further. As you can see, my spelling skills are better in Chinese than in English, the lost kingdom of Great Ionia. Or maybe they were just nice people, I don't know, but the Chinese didn't think they were, όπως θα δούμε στη συνέχεια. This is a lecture which has its origin in Don DeMillo's, the great American writer's phrase, Greeks never say anything that hasn't already been said 1,000 times. Except that when I started talking about this lecture, people from Greece were contacting me. They were saying, this is garbage, isa patēonas. The Greeks were never in China. What's this stunt that you're trying to pull? on these unsuspecting people in Australia, which, as we know, is a Greek cultural backwater. And you're all very gullible and you're going to believe everything I say. And the whole idea is, what I'm going to speak about tonight exists completely outside the Greek narrative. And the Greek narrative is one of continuity, and we know about it. We know about the ancient times, we know about the colonies, we know about Alexander the Great, the Hellenistic period, Byzantium, which is a dirty word for some people, and everything else that happened after that. We don't know about the kingdom of Dayuan in China. Why is that? Because even though we are a race that loves to write about ourselves and examine ourselves and leave evidence about ourselves, Herodotus, Thucydides, you name it, we never wrote about Dayuan. There are no records, Greek records, about this place. But there are Chinese records. And we know about this place because of the records of the Grand Historian and the Book of Hun. It's also mentioned, this kingdom that we're going to discuss tonight, in the accounts of the famous Chinese explorer Zhang Qian in 130 BC and various other embassies that followed him to this place. He went here, the capital of Dayuan, Alexandria Eschati, the outermost Alexandria, which then was on the border of China. Today, it's in Tajikistan. Okay. So what are we talking about? We're talking about descendants of Greek colonists and who were settled by Alexander the Great in the Ferghana Valley in 329 BC. These are people who then were added to by further migrations of Greeks from the Seleucid Empire, Babylon, these places, and the Greco-Bactrians just above India, modern-day Afghanistan, until there were various movements of nomadic people around about 160 BC, and they became isolated. And they formed their own kingdom in isolation of the other Greeks. Dayuan. Da means big in Chinese, first character. Second character, Yuan, is a phonetic approximation of Iones, because we know the Indians referred to the Greeks as Yavan, Ionas, Yunnan, all these roots, Yuan in China, and that character down there also refers to two persons seated under one roof. And what it refers to, that radical, is a tribe, a closely knit group of people. That's how they saw the Greeks. So we see that in the time period that we're going to discuss, China reached basically, without Tibet, right into Central Asia. This is Tang China, and our kingdom is on the borderland of that, where that lake is. The Chinese accounts of Dayuan, Great Ionia, talk about these people as being urbanized dwellers with Caucasian features, living in walled cities and having, as they say, customs identical to those of the Greco-Bactrians next door. They're also referred to as manufacturers, craftsmen, and lovers of wine. And meet your first Dayuanian, if you like. He's a Greek soldier. He appears in this woolen wall tapestry in the 3rd to 2nd century BC, and as we can see, he's got blue eyes. He looks slightly like some of those old Mycenaean depictions of soldiers that you would remember from Greek history books. Now, why are we discussing this at all? It's because the interaction between the Dayuan, the Great Ionians, and the Chinese is historically crucial. It represents one of the first major contacts between an urbanized Western civilization and the Chinese civilization. It opens the way up for the Silk Road to be created, and that links the East to West in cultural and mercantile exchange from the 1st century BC right up to the 15th century BC. So when they talk about Marco Polo being one of the first Westerners to arrive in China, garbage. As usual, we did it first. And the way it works is profound and interesting and complex because, you know, these boys here, everyone knows these boys in Xi'an, and there are a few of them at the NGV now. They're surprisingly larger than one would think. It is generally now considered by responsible scholars, δηλαδή not Greek ones, normal scholars, that the construction and the design of these terracotta soldiers would have been influenced either by Greek craftsmen working directly for the emperor or by craftsmen coming into contact with the art produced in Dayuan and the Hellenistic world. Professor Lucas Nicol, Chair of Asian Art History at Vienna University, says, I imagine that a Greek sculptor would have been at the site to train the locals. And also we know through DNA that has been taken from people at the site, because as we know, the craftsmen, some of them were sacrificed, some of them died there while building the tomb. It's Indo-European DNA. How did they get there? Well, they got there because Alexander the Great went on a rampage, decided to destroy Persia, and then said, well, let's see how far we can go. Got as far as India, planted his colonists there. Why did he plant his colonists there? Because if he leaves them there, then they're not troubling him back home and destabilising the empire after they've learnt all these strange and foreign ways. The best thing to do with these soldiers is to parcel out land in the conquered territories the way the Romans did, just leave them there. And when you are in India, in Afghanistan, you start to wander around, you start to explore other opportunities. We are a peripatetic race. We like to move around, we like to see what's going on. And some of them found their way to Ferghana and Central Asia and the borders of China. Strabo, the great Greek geographer, says that the Greeks went beyond Alexandria Eschati, which is the capital of the kingdom of Dayuan, and extended their empire as far as the Seres and the Phryni. The Seres were the Chinese. That's where we get words like Sino, Siniko, Tichos, if you like. There are indications they would have led expeditions right up to what we call today Xinjiang, which is Chinese Turkestan, and leading to the first known contacts, as we said, between the West and the East. And various statuettes and representations of a particularly Greek mould have been found north of the Tian Shan Mountains and are on display today in the Museum of Urumqi in Western China. That's the Turkish heartland in China. It's a very vulnerable kingdom. It's a kingdom which is constantly experiencing invasions and instability. Around about 160 BC, it's invaded by the Scythian tribes called the Sakya, known as the Ta-Yuan in Chinese. And these Ta-Yuan, who had originally settled in the Ili Valley in the general area of the lake Isikul, that was the lake I showed earlier in the map, were retreating southward after having been dislodged by another Indo-European people, because remember, there were Indo-European tribes speaking Sogdian and Tocharian languages in central China during this period. That is the furthest extent of the European languages in the area. So these people are all moving around, fighting with each other, engaging with the Greeks, fighting with the Greeks, joining the Greeks, and creating this interesting, fascinating, lost, if you like, hybrid civilization. So what happens is that these, here we go, that's another one. Here you can see the hybridity forming. Sort of Greek, Asian features. This is at the time when the Scythians had joined the kingdom. According to one of the scholars, William Tarn, he says that the Ta-Yuan tribes who were attacking seized the Greek province of Ferghana. At that time, it was easy to do so. The Bactrians, who had the back of the Dayuan kingdom, were themselves in India, so there was no one to assist the Greeks on the borders of China, and therefore Bactria was lost, and these tribes took over that place. Now, when the Chinese envoy Zhang Qian describes Dayuan around 128 BC, he mentions, apart from that flourishing urban civilization, it's very important because the polis is the main characteristic of ancient Greek classical civilization, as we know. He talks about warriors shooting arrows on horseback, and that's a depiction. And we know that the area around the kingdom is arid, and here we have soldiers wearing a veil, keep dust out of their face. And I have it on good authority that this is the ancestor of the Chinese propensity to wear face masks while walking in the city of Melbourne today. But what it probably does suggest is that you're getting already here a mixture between the Greeks and tribes around the region who are nomadic and preserve these kind of traditions. This is what the Chinese believed that the Dayuān looked like. This is your typical Greek, according to a Chinese. Yeah? He's bringing a sacrifice to one of the Greek gods. So, the Chinese scholars say around about 106 to 101 BC, the country was said to be an ally with the neighbouring kingdom of Kanju, which is Sogdia. They are also a European-speaking people. The Chinese record the name of the king of Dayuan as Mukua, which could have been Mavakis or Mavis, which is a Scythian name. So that's going back to what we said before about the Greeks becoming Scythianized and the Scythianized becoming Hellenized until you get this hybrid civilization taking place, which is sort of similar to what happened in the Crimea with the Scythians there, bringing that closer to home. So we have this vibrant kingdom, this kingdom that is able to exist on the borders of a very large and flourishing civilization, a kingdom that is able to absorb other cultures, other nationalities, and retain Hellenistic, if you like, characteristics. And this is important because when we're looking at China, ancient China, and we compare ancient China to Greece, the major thing that comes to mind is this. First of all, by this stage, 100 BC, China has already had a 1,000-year-long history of managing vast populations and leaving extensive records. If we think we're great at record taking, these are people that had extensive bureaucratic records about every city, about every official, about every moment of their history, which all the emperors had to study in order to gain precedence to know how to rule. And what's even more remarkable is the fact that most of these texts are preserved to the present day, whereas with the Greeks, that's generally not the case. Not brilliant at bureaucracy, great at talking ourselves up, but nowhere near meticulous as records, with the records, which is why the existence of this kingdom can be found primarily, except for the archaeological remains, only within the accounts of the Chinese historians. Now, according to Zhang Qian, who is here pictured being sent on an embassy to Great Ionia, Dayuan. The Dayuan, he describes them as inhabitants of a region corresponding to Ferghana, as we said, to the west of the Chinese Empire. He says that the kingdom's capital, Alexandria Eskhati, is called Guishan, and that's where it gets its modern name, Khujand. He says that the kingdom contains 60,000 families, comprising a population of 300,000, with 60,000 trade troops, a viceroy, and a national assistant prince. There's a governor-general whose seat lies to the east. So already we're seeing a very big population. I would argue that probably not all of them were Greek, but definitely united under this type of government, and a type of government we haven't seen before with regard to the ancient Greeks or the Hellenistic Greeks. It's almost like a federalised government. And that report is contained in the famous book, the Han Shu, which is basically the book of the Han, Han being the racial name of the Chinese. Now, there's a map, a contemporary map of China, and Dayuan is listed to the west. What does he say about them? This Zhang Qian, the general, he says that the customs of the Dayuan are identical to those of the Bactrians to the south, who were Greek. Their customs, he says, are the same. The people have fixed abodes, they're not nomadic, they lived in walled cities and regular houses. They have no great kings or heads, but everywhere in their walled cities they have installed small kings. And I would humbly submit that is absolute proof that these people were Greek. Every single one of them was a king. Most importantly, Zhang Qian describes the people who live around the Greeks, the Yuezhi, the Wusun, the Xiongnu, who were the ancestors of the Huns. They are nomads. These people are not. And he writes, the Greeks have walled cities and houses. The large and small cities belonging to them, fully 70 in number, contain an aggregate population of several hundreds of thousands. There are more than 70 other cities in the country. And he also comments on the Caucasian-like appearance and the culture of the people around Dayuan. Look at that. That was found in Dayuan. Although the states from Dayuan west to Anxi speak rather different languages, their customs are generally similar and their languages mutually intelligible. What that suggests is that during this period, the Greek language as it was received and transported from Greece through Bactria and then to Dayuan was already breaking up into dialects, which were still mutually intelligible, but were distinct. And that's fascinating, because that would have happened only within 200 or 300 years. And it makes one wonder here, if the Greek language survives, what kind of changes will be made. Of course, the people of Melbourne would speak the purest Greek of all. I think that the Sydney people would lose their language first, but that's just me. And he writes, the men all have deep-set eyes with profuse beards, whiskers, and hooked noses. The Chinese are stereotyping us. For them, we all look the same. They are skillful at commerce, he says, and they will haggle over a fraction of a cent. Remind you of anybody. Women are held in great respect, and men make decisions on the advice of their women. Obviously, they came from Epirus. And he again mentions the fact they were great manufacturers and lovers of wine. They make wine from grapes, which was important because there were no grapes. Grapes were introduced to the region by the Greeks of Dayuan, and the greatest grape-growing regions of China are the regions bordering on where that Dayuan kingdom was. And he says, wealthy people store up as much as 10,000 stones and over in their cellars and keep it for several tens of years without spoiling. And he ends, the people are fond of wine. Now, Sima Qian, who was another historian, and it's a sad tale because back in those times, if you fell foul of the emperor, bad things could happen to you. He was the court historian, very influential, and his way of writing history, the narrative, Herodotus, for example, writes in a way where he wants you to understand what the reasons are for the clash between East and West. Sima Qian's ideology in writing history is talking about the ebb and flow of nature and how harmony is restored by various events. Unfortunately, in a battle where a general that he was a friend of lost, he took the side of that general and tried to justify him publicly by writing an essay about him, so the emperor ordered that his testicles be chopped off. Now, when that happens and you're a high-ranking mandarin or a scholar, the only thing to do is to kill yourself, and he chose not to and endure the shame of being a eunuch in order to finish his histories. If he had not done that, we would know nothing about the Greek people. So a shout out to the descendants of Sima Qian, because apparently there are some in China, from before the chopping, obviously. According to his account, though, grapes and alfalfa, were introduced to China from Dayuan. And he writes, the regions around Dayuan make wine out of grapes, the wealthy inhabitants keeping as many as 10,000 or more piculs. It's a P-I-C-U-L-S, it's a form of measurement, stored away. It can be kept as long as 20 or 30 years without spoiling. It's a good wine. Tifla nachunigali. The people love their wine and the horses love their alfalfa. We're going to come back to the horses. The Han envoys brought grape and alfalfa seeds to China, and the emperor, for the first time, tried growing these plants in areas of rich soil. Later, when the Han, these are the Chinese, acquired large numbers of horses, and envoys from foreign states began to arrive with their retinues, the lands on all sides were planted with grapes and alfalfa as far as the eye could see. Now, in Australia, the stereotype was, why can't Greeks play soccer? Because every corner they get to, they build a fish and chip shop. In China, it was, why can't they grow alfalfa? It was, same thing. He, Sima Qian, also claims that metal casting was introduced to the Dayuan region by Chinese deserters. So you get a similar kind of cultural exchange happening. And I mean, look at that. This could be Byzantine, couldn't it? It's very similar to Byzantine, late Roman type of sculpture, and yet this is Dayuan, 100 BC, middle of China. And he writes, the casting of coins and vessels was formerly unknown. Later, however, when some of the Chinese soldiers attached to the Han embassies ran away and surrendered to the people of the area, they taught them how to cast metal and manufacture weapons. So we're seeing innovations in manufacture, we're seeing cultural exchange, we're seeing a kingdom that is Greek engaging with the area around it and changing into something hybrid and something new and something that our narrative doesn't take into account. So, following the reports of Zhang Qian, who went there to see what these Greeks are doing, the other thing he did is he said to the Greeks, look, we're being attacked by the Huns, and the Huns are giving us a hard time, and the Yuezhi, the Tokharians, are giving us a hard time. Will you enter into an alliance with us? And the Greeks said, not interested. Then the Chinese emperor did what Chinese people have been doing for thousands of years. Said, okay, you don't want to be our political allies or our military allies, let's trade. So decided that he wanted to establish commercial urban relationships with these centres. And the Chinese historian says it as follows: the Son of Heaven, that's the emperor, not Jesus, on hearing all reasoned thus: Dayuan and its possessions are a large country, full of rare things, with a population living in fixed abodes and given to occupations somewhat identical with those of the Chinese people, but with weak armies and placing great value on the rich produce of China. So the Chinese, why is that funny? Do you know how many people I've met that look like that from the 60s? To kokoraki, to mustaki, to strefto. This is more proof, if you needed any, that these people were Greek. It's kind of like Karagyosi. So the Chinese send numerous embassies, about 10 every year, to these countries, and they also bypass Dayuan and go to Selevkid Syria and Bactria and try and undermine Dayuan by playing off those Greek cities against Dayuan, because what's the best thing to do in order to weaken the Greek kingdom? You get other Greeks involved who are rivals. So they do this, 10 a year, and somewhere along the line, through all these cultural exchanges, it appears that the Greeks of Dayuan adopted Buddhism. And yeah, this monk here, look at him, he's a Buddhist monk. He's talking to the Bodhisattva of compassion, and he's got blue eyes and facial hair, which is not common in the depictions of Chinese in the region. And we have here, I mean, look at that, that is just a typical Greek. That was found in Dayuan. He's a horseman, and he's wearing the Parthian cap, which was adopted by the Macedonian soldiers, and he's looking at us through the mists of time saying, guys, I'm here. I was in China, believe it or not. O ye of little faith. The main thing that the Chinese were interested in were the tall and powerful horses of the region. They called them the heavenly horses. Yeah? Because they needed them to fight the Huns, who were pressing down on them from the north of China and from the west. And they kept on asking for the horses, and the Greeks were doing what Greeks do, like, for example, when they're asked to sell a business or when people approach them to buy a house. So I want your house, okay, charge a double, charge a triple, charge a quadruple. No, you're not getting it. Because για να το θέλεις εσύ κάτι ξέρεις. Refused to give them the horses, and this caused a series of conflicts and misunderstandings, and somewhere along the line, some pesky Chinese ambassadors were killed while they were in the Greek court. We don't know how that happened. And there was some type of deal that was struck between a Greek prime minister and some Chinese envoys, and some gold changed hands, but then the gold went missing and there were no horses. And the Chinese emperor said, stuff this. And he sent out Li Guangli, who was one of the greatest generals of ancient China, and he was the brother of his favourite concubine, because that's how they rolled in ancient China. That's how you got your positions. He was given 6,000 horsemen and 30,000 young men of bad reputation, rounded up from the provinces. And by the time he got to Greece, to Great Ionia, his army was depleted because they were fighting local and petty rulers and doing the things that they do. He gets to a place called Yuchangli, takes on the Greeks, and loses. The Greeks beat him. He goes away with his tail between his legs. The horses live to neigh another day. And notice one thing about these horses, this one and that one, which is that these are, if you like, idealised, stereotyped horses based on the Greek classical originals, and they are based on the horse breeds that were brought by the Greeks from wherever they found them from into the kingdom of Dayuan and bred them successfully. Okay? So the emperor says, okay, you've lost, but guess what? It's China. We've got plenty of people. Sends Li Guangli with a larger army and oxen and donkeys and camels to carry supplies. And he reaches the Dayuan capital, which by now is a place called Arshi, which we're trying to identify. We're not quite sure. After a 40-day siege, an epic 40-day siege of the capital, the Chinese break through the outer wall and cut the water supply. And the nobles of Arshi do what Greeks do when in a crisis. They turn on each other and kill their leader. And they send his head to Li Guangli and say, look, take your horses, take his head, just don't hurt us. So Li says, okay, and he appoints one of the Chinese nobles to be the king of the Greeks and takes all of the horses. So all of the petty states surrounding Dayuan, which were controlled by the Greeks, recognized China as their suzerain, as their leader. And he returns to the Jade Gate, Lipsili, if you like, the equivalent, about 100 BC with 10,000 men and 1,000 horses. Basically, almost the entire breeding stock of Dayuan. And then what you see is that these horses will, their style, their breed will reverberate through Chinese history. They are prized, they are revered, and their source comes from us. And then there's no point having a kingdom which is impoverished on your doorstep if you can't trade with them. There's a peace treaty which is signed, ambassadors once again are sent to the west, caravans are sent to the area, and then there's trade until such time as they begin to vanish slowly out of history. Because these are the War of the Heavenly Horses, which is a Chinese epic, is the major source of history, historic source for the Greeks in the area. Now, there are heaps of cities around the old area of Dayuan which exist and testify to the Greeks. This is Termez, which in Chinese was referred to as Dumi, in a group of 5 cities around the outskirts of Dayuan. And recent excavations have verified that it was originally founded by the Greeks as a garrison on a rocky height in the right bank of the Oxus River and was called Thermi. And as you can see, there's Greek-style bricks, ceramics, sherds of pottery which have been discovered. Prime example, how more Greek can you get than ruins that kind of look like the Parthenon? Let's talk a bit about Dayuan art. Ancient Great Ionian art. Anyone tell me who that could possibly represent? Who? Bobulina? Nah. You lose. Anyone else? No. Look at what he's wearing on his head. Hercules! Exactly. Because the scholars now believe that the Dayuan, the Greeks of Great Ionia, introduced the image of Hercules into traditional Chinese art. And what the Chinese did is they conflated him with one of the heavenly kings of Buddhism, a Vajrapani, who is a protector or guide of the Buddha, but who's instantly recognizable. Look at that. We have Dilondi, and we also have his club. Yeah? So they take something, they transform it into something which belongs to them, which they can identify with, but the connection is palpable. Now, in other Buddhist sculptures, you can see Hellenistic influences from the Dayuan, naked figures, which you don't generally see in Eastern art. These are the frescoes of the Chu-Chi grottos, images of Ritian, Yuetian, which look like the Greek Helios and Artemis. And have a look at that. This is a typical example of the Greeks of Dayuan influencing China. This is a gilded silver ewer from the tomb of Li Xian in the Dayuan district in Ningxia province, which is sort of central China. And what interests us most is the motif on the belly of the ewer. What we can see is 3 pairs of young, handsome men and beautiful women who look a lot like Greeks, don't they, with their chlamydes and chitones and all the things that neo-pagans wear, dynamic poses, straight noses, you know, those noses that don't have the bump here, which is typical of depictions of Greeks in ancient art, and naked or half-naked bodies, which again for the East was a mark of shame. They didn't do that. But all of a sudden they are. Why? Because we are a bad, bad influence. Now, I know it's difficult to see, but it's a sort of a, this is a riton. It's an ancient Greek drinking container, which is widespread in ancient Greece and the Near East. Conical and bull-shaped, bull-head ritons appeared early in the Cretan civilization, and these horn-shaped ritons were widely used in the Hellenistic age. They were not the inventions of the Vikings. Again, I stress, we invented everything first. And you see them in Chinese art in scenes where people are drinking and making wine and depictions of grapes. And this is one of them. This is a stone plate on the tomb of the Sui dynasty in Ta-Yuan, Shaanxi province. And around the large relief plates are a series of honeysuckle motifs, all of which are Hellenistic elements. Now, tombs in Gansu province belonging to the state of Qin, because as we know, China was not always unified. There were various states belonging to the Chinese civilization that would war against each other and battle for ascendancy, have yielded Dayuan items such as glazed. Well, this one here is actually showing the art of grape making. Patantas na filha. Yeah? How more Greek can you get than that? Greek pottery in Gansu province. Sculptures of people wearing Thracian army uniform. That hat is characteristic of the region of Thrace. And, you know, conical hats and other gear which definitely does not belong in China, but can be placed within the tradition of the Greek Macedonian army. Now, it's possible that a group of Dayuan Greek acrobatic performers were presented by a king of Burma to the Emperor An of Han, that's a Chinese kingdom, in 120 AD. We know that during this time, both in China, Burma, and areas around the borderlands of China, ethnic Greeks were employed during the Hellenistic period and beyond as musicians and athletes. The Book of the Later Han, another historical Chinese book, states that the Emperor An transferred these entertainers from his countryside residence to the capital of Luoyang, where they gave a performance at his court and they were rewarded with gold, silver and other gifts. And reputable scholars believe that what we see here is a depiction of Greek acrobats in the Chinese court. Now, that's all well and good, and I brought you to about 100 BC or thereabouts, and then the next question is, well, what happened after that? And the answer is, I don't know, because the Chinese don't mention this kingdom again. What we believe happens is that over a period of time, other races migrate to the area. You have the Sogdians, who are in the ascendancy. You have Turkish tribes coming to the region. You have movements of Scythians and Persian-speaking people in the area. And the argument is that the Greeks would have just assimilated with those people who would have dominated them and would have vanished, which is why we have no records of the people of themselves writing for themselves. But the contacts between the Greek world and China never ceased. And we know this because during Roman times, Greeks were sent as part of embassies to China. We know that missionaries from the Byzantine world, Syriac-speaking and Greek-speaking, visited the Chinese court. We know that as a result of that, a good deal of the Mongolian and Chinese people were converted to Christianity. And we also know that as a result of these cultural exchanges, Nestorian monks belonging to the Byzantine Empire stole, because that's what good monks do, stole the technique of cultivating silkworms from China, because that was an industrial secret, and took that back to Byzantium and created the silk industry for which Byzantium was so famous and prospered. The last diplomatic contacts with the Greek world are recorded as having taken place in the 11th century AD, from the Chinese perspective. The Wenxiang Tongkao, written by the historian Ma Tuanling, and from the history of Song, we know that the Byzantine Emperor Michael VII, Parapinakis Caesar, who is known in Chinese as Mieli Shalin Kaisar of Fulin, because Fulin was the name for the Byzantine Empire, sent an embassy to China's Song dynasty that arrived in the 1081 during the Emperor Shenzong's reign, and the history of Song describes the tribute that was given to the Chinese emperor, the discussions that took place about a possible alliance, about attacking Turkish tribes from the rear, and also, that one? There's another book called The History of the Yuan, and that offers a biography of a Byzantine man named Aisye, which we believe means either Joshua or Joseph, who served the court of Guyuk Khan, the Mongol king, but then became a head astronomer and physician for the court of Kublai Khan. You know Kublai Khan, and you would have heard of the Coleridge's stately dome in Xanadu, stately dome did Kublai Khan decree, who's the Mongol founder of the Yuan dynasty. He invaded China and established the Mongol dynasty there. This man, Joshua, was granted the title Prince of Fulin, Prince of Byzantium, and his Fulin Wang and his children are listed with their Chinese names, which seem to match with transliterations of Christian names such as Elias, Luke, and Anthony. So after that period of time, you have an enduring legacy. The memory of the cultural links between the Greek, in inverted commas, world, because it's not exactly Greek, it's Byzantine, which is a hybrid civilization of its own, and the Chinese is preserved by the Persians. And this is a Persian miniature which was created by Nizami Ganjavi, entitled Separated by a Green Curtain, a Chinese and a Greek artist compete with each other. So this is one of the last memories we have of direct contact between Chinese and Greek-speaking civilizations before the, obviously, the Seljuk invasions, the Ottoman invasions, colonialism, which created a break between that natural, if you like, tendency to communicate. What we do know is that the terminal point of the Silk Road was Trapezunda, the capital of the empire of Trapezunda, of Pondos, and we know that Pondian monks were reaching areas which had become Islamified, had become Persian-speaking, the province of Romayiris, as they called it, and were conducting missionary work there. So these contacts never died out until the massive break after the Seljuk/Ottoman period. And there, obviously, we don't know what Greeks did. I am sure that Greeks were travelling under the guise of the Seljuks or the Ottomans. We just don't know. There are no sources. What we did know is we did make it there, that there was a Greek kingdom there. I think there's compelling archaeological evidence to, if you like, verify the Chinese sources, because obviously when we come up with a source, we don't accept it as true. People could be saying whatever they want to fulfill whatever aims they have in writing history, but there is enough there to verify the fact that the Greeks were there in Dayuan, Great Ionia, and created an interesting civilization that was sufficiently annoying enough to warrant an invasion by the Chinese to go and grab the horses. And I think we need to seek redress. We want our horses back. We also want our 10,000 warriors back as well, and we can put them all around the Parthenon to stop Lord Elgin and his descendants from ever trying to take anything ever again. I think that I have bored and tired you enough, so I'm going to stop here. Thank you. And having done that, I'm not going to stop because I'm going to open it up to questions.
Excellent. Another interesting lecture. Please put your hands again once more for Costa Kalimniou. Well done. No, there is. You never cease to amaze me, Dean. Your diversity of understanding and knowledge of subjects. I don't know where you find the time, mate. That's all I've got to say. But well done.
What does he
anyway.
want from me?
Okay, questions. I'm sure there's many of those.
No.
Louis?
Hi, Dean.
Hey.
You mentioned about the Silk Road. How did they form the contacts, and if you can elaborate a little bit about that, and being different languages and so forth, and how did they travel, or how did the route go? If you can
I can.
speak about
I will.
that. Thanks.
When you look at from this perspective, the two worlds are separated only by the Persian-speaking world. So you actually have, in terms of languages that you have to negotiate, an in-between area, which is primarily Aramaic and Persian-speaking, and you have Aramaic and Persian speakers on the borders of Byzantium as well, or the Roman Empire. So it's not that hard. And then the whole idea is, and that's where the common thread comes in, and my argument would be, is that from at least the time of Alexander, there are Greeks there. And because the Greeks are there, they're establishing those contacts because they have to. That is now their world. It's just like us here. We arrive in Melbourne and then we discover Albury. We go there on holidays. You know what I mean? And then we discover Sydney. And then the world is our oyster.
The gentleman over here.
Dean, a question about the ethnic makeup of the community that has been attributed to Alexander. Alexander the Great had a lot of mercenaries, and so they would have been they were collected along the way.
Yep.
And became
Absolutely.
and became effectively citizens or nationals, just like the Romans did. They turned their mercenaries into nationals. Do you know if there's been any DNA work done that identifies what the ethnic makeup of the community was? They may have been Greek speaking, but half of the known world spoke Greek.
Ethnic makeup and DNA are two different things, yeah? And what makes up an ethnos is something which is not scientific. What we do know is that there were tests done on the craftsmen who were buried at the tomb in Xi'an,
Yes.
and they were Indo-European. So scholars are saying, well, they were likely to have been Greek craftsmen. Other scholars say, no, there would have been other Indo-European speaking people who were native to the region, or they were a mixture of both. We don't know. We'll never know. What we do know from the Chinese sources is that there were Greek-speaking people living in the kingdom, and that they were supplemented by people who either invaded, settled, generally of Persian and those kind of language groups.
Thank you. Down the back, is that right? I'll just get this gentleman down the back.
Thank you for the very interesting lecture. With the modern horses in China, so are they genetically related to the? Have they actually done studies on the modern horses to see that they're genetically related to the ancient horses? And also,
yes.
have they been compared to the horses in Greece today as well? Is there any link or anything?
There is a particular brand of horse in Western China, which is in the Turkish regions and in Mongolia, which they say is that horse. Now, there are a lot of horses in China, and they're bred for many different reasons, okay? But they say that that particular horse, because it was prized by the non-Chinese people who lived there after the Greeks, who are the Sogdians and the Turks and the Mongolians, and the rearing of horses is very big in their culture, and they maintain that breed. They do argue that that is that breed. It's a smaller, hardier breed than the thoroughbreds that you would see today.
Is this working? Yes, it is. Dean, did I get it right that you said people doubted what you were presenting to us tonight?
Oh yeah, there were doubters,
Right,
there were
okay,
haters.
if they were doubters, and take you back to, I don't want you to score your own goal here, but
Oh, feel free. I do it all the time.
why is it doubted?
It's doubted because the Greeks who lived there left no records. And because they left no records, the Greek people did not know about this place. And not many Greek people speak Chinese, so that not many Greek people have the opportunity to link the two cultures together, delve into the Chinese archives in order to discover what has been written. Absolutely, but it's something which seems to have not been given emphasis. But it's a genuine fact. Scholars have written extensively about it in modern times. We know that they were there. There's enough evidence archaeologically wise to suggest that they were there, but it hasn't translated into the Greek national narrative. I mean, we're very proud of our diaspora, but this has been left out of the narrative, which I can understand why, because all the other areas to which we went, we left records. I mean, we're here, we write about ourselves here. We're constantly writing, reassessing, sharing information. It didn't happen there because it was for a short period of time, and then they were subsumed and they were assimilated.
John?
Thank you very much, Dean, for your excellent lecture. We heard quite a lot of new information that we knew nothing about before.
Trust me on this.
No. Yes, trust you, I suppose, yes. Now, the question I want to ask you is that you stated that the Chinese did show a lot of interest in the horses that this Greek community has. But according to biology, the horse appeared first in Mongolia. That's where it originated.
Yeah.
And I found it very strange that they were very curious about the breed or the size or the difference, that they sort of went out of the way to fight a war to get the horses.
Well, put it this way, you know that Arabian horses were prized. Yeah. In China, a horse similar to the Przewalski horse, which is that small, stocky variety of horse, was common. Okay? Now, the Huns had that, the Chinese had that. The Greeks had a horse which was bigger than that, stronger than that, faster than that. It was the difference between a chariot and a tank. The Chinese wanted the tank. So yes, the horse may have originated from Mongolia, but it had various adventures along the way. It's like the word banyo. Yeah? Banyo comes from the Greek valanion, and yet it goes into the Latin language as banyo and comes back to us. Yeah? This is what happened. The horses bred, did whatever they did, came back to them.
Thank you.
Mary?
Thanks, Dean. Really interesting.
Thank you.
If we were to compare to other Hellenized urban cities of the time, was there any evidence of any Greek writing that we might have seen?
They haven't found Greek writing.
No.
They've found sculptures, they've found columns, they haven't found writing yet.
Because that would be very compelling.
That would be brilliant. Αριστίδης was here. Με τους Κινέζους. Και έκανε τον Κινέζο. Yeah.
And we do know that their main language would have been Greek.
Well, we only know this because the Chinese tell us it was so. Yeah. But then it was all Greek to them anyway. Who knows?
How long were they there for?
About 300 years.
Oh, wow.
250 pairs. 250.
You're happy to keep on going, Dean? We've got a couple more questions.
If other people have got questions, I'm happy to answer.
I think we've still got a few more.
So you said this happened round about 160 BC?
The War of the Heavenly Horses, yes.
Oh, you're right. And so when was the sort of glory days of the Silk Road?
The Silk Road was after that. The whole idea is that the presence of these people there opened that up.
Can we see anyone else there with a question? Yes, George? By the way, congratulations, George, on an excellent Writers' Festival last week. Well done to you and your team.
Yeah, speaking of writing, I'm just curious, is there any literary manifestation of this culture in Chinese literature of that time?
Well, apart from the historic epics, Sima Qian, the Han Shu, and all those epics, there's a lot. And then that worship of that horse, that breed of horse, permeates through Chinese poetry. They describe its attributes, its fleet of foot, its style, its gracefulness. So yes, great influences there.
Thank you.
But it's more of a percolation, yeah?
Any more questions? Yes, one more. We'll make this the final one, guys. I think that's fair enough, isn't it? Anyone else? No? We're fine, good.
Thanks for tonight's lecture. I'm just wondering whether you imagine people from other Greek-speaking lands at the time would migrate through and make a new living, a new life for themselves.
Well, the
in
Chinese
these
sources say
kingdoms.
that they did. And it makes sense. The Greek will go wherever there's work. The Greek will go wherever there's an opportunity. The Greek will go somewhere where the language is similar so that it can make a use of that opportunity. And the Chinese say that there were Greeks who were going from Bactria, from the Seleucid kingdom in Mesopotamia, to Dayuān. So yes, absolutely. Here endeth the lesson.
Pretty much so
one more,
now.
One more.
Oh, one more, why not? Where's the last one? No, he was just stretching. No, it's not a
Stretching.
stretch. Is that a stretch or a question? It's a question. Okay, I'll come down there.
It's a question which will stretch our intellectual faculties and
Sorry?
do stuff.
Just a quick question, Dean.
Yeah.
Just off topic, if you have an opinion on the Greek heritage of the Kalash people in Pakistan?
Yeah, I don't believe that you could call people who have been, even if they were descendants of some ancient Greeks, I don't believe you can get people that have been isolated from the Greeks for 2,000 years and then call them Greek. There are a lot of things that have to take place before there's a culture of kinship. Yeah. Same with, there are Lebanese people now that say, oh, we're Antiochian Greeks. Well, being a nation is not about DNA, it's about shared experience, common historical narrative, customs, and all these things, shared language. So the answer is maybe DNA-wise, although I tend to think not. I think they're Persian people. But even if they were descendants of the Greeks, does that make them Greek? Probably not. Very exciting. Yes, I think the fact that they know that they can nick our horses will influence their commercial policy in ways that we can only imagine. Thank you.
Thank you, Louis. Well, this might interest you, Dean. Next week's lecture is delivered by a lecturer from Greece, Themistoklis Papadopoulos, who happens to be delivering this lecture at the Greek Studies Conference, which is taking place next week in Adelaide, and he'll be coming here afterwards. And the topic will be a multicultural Epirus, population, languages and education during the last years of the Ottoman Empire. I'm sure you'll be here to listen to that one, Dean, since you've got a very close relation to
well, my federation is sponsoring that.
Yeah, it is it? Pan-Epiriotic Federation of Australia. Thank you very much.
Oh, pleasure.
Thank you, Denise, for sponsoring tonight's lecture.
Thank you, Denise.
Thank you, Denise. And if anyone appreciates what we're doing here, please go to the back and sponsor one of the lectures either this year or next year. And I'm sure we're going to have Dean back next year. I'm sure Nick's organised something.
Oh, actually, I'm going to be back in September.
You
I'm going to
are.
be speaking about Pushkin, the Russian poet, and his take on the Greek Revolution. So stay tuned if you're interested.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much. And on behalf of the community, as a jest of our appreciation, and I'm sure there's a reason behind this, Nico has decided to donate this book to you, 100 χρόνια θέατρο των Ελλήνων στην Αυστραλία.
Thank you. It's what I've always wanted.
I've got a gut feeling he wants to prepare a lecture on that one. Thank you very much, guys. Stay around for a cup of coffee, have a chat, buy some books, and please support us by sponsoring one of these lectures. Good night.